And yeah, so with that, I just want to introduce Erin. So Erin Waters is one of the board members of Basic Rights Oregon, and she's also an amazing educator and activist, and I have to say, like a community organizer who is truly our community. Every event I've been to in Portland, like, is that Erin over there? Is she holding the drum? Okay, yeah, that is Erin. So, yeah, so I'm very excited to have her here today and to be talking to all of us. So let's give it up for Erin Waters.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me. I will work on my speed, so please let me know if there is an issue. So yes, my name is Erin Waters. I use she and her pronouns. I'll eventually figure out where this microphone needs to be. And so, like Nancy said, I do a lot of different types of things in community. The way I see myself is really not so much as an activist or advocate, as much as I'm just a community member who shows up. I was on a phone call just the other day, and whenever you're in a group of new people, they're like, what brings you here? What brought you to this table, this particular place? I don't like that question. I don't like it because why is that important? We're here. Like, it's important to understand what's behind it, but why are we here? And I find myself answering the same way every time. I'm a community member, and here's where the work is. And it's just that simple. Whoever shows up does the work, right? Whether it's positive, negative, it's the people who show up who manage to get things done. And so today we're going to talk about reconnecting, refreshing, and redefining our work. I will admit I had a different word than refresh. I can't remember what it was, but it was something else. So please forgive me if I make mistakes there. So reconnecting. Re-engage, recall, reply, respond, lots of re-words in this moment. And my favorite response to thinking about how I reconnect with things is to think about Sylvia Rivera. And in 1973, at the Christopher Street Liberation Day rally, y'all better quiet down. We have a tendency to assume that because we're doing this work that we've been here a long time, or that we've done a lot of it, that we know what we're doing. And that's really not appropriate. It's not fair. We forget about our gaps because we get so convinced of whatever area or specialty space or human beings or work stream is important to us. And so one of the things I want to start with is how I got reconnected to some work. Those of you who know me know I used to be a part of a large national healthcare system. Shit was hard, y'all. I'm not gonna lie. It was really hard. And after years of doing work which affected people's lives, got people access to healthcare, I really started to question what material conditions am I changing for people in this role. And eventually I realized I was being pushed further and further away from people. I started as a community health worker when I came into that system, and went from being a community health worker to being someone who was revolutionizing their system in as many different ways as possible. Wasn't getting paid extra for that. And that stuff wears on you over time. The very same people that I was working with and training would, weeks later, misgender me. They'd make mistakes. People who knew me wouldn't correct other folks. And so I needed to think about how I got reconnected to the work. And so, in a big way, it happened a couple years ago when protests popped off. All of a sudden, everybody was reminded that we can go out and do things. We can just go out in the street. We can be together. And I was really excited. My family is kind of half militant, so I grew up between DC and Baltimore. If there was a protest or a major thing, we were going. I'm probably one of the only black trans femmes you might meet who was at the Million Man March, and a lot of other things as well. So trying to figure out how I was going to get involved in the movement, because I was already doing this work as a day job. I was already doing community organizing. I was already part of boards in different spaces. What was I going to do that was going to be different? Well, I was going to get down there. I was going to get out to the front. And I was going to figure it out, because that's what we do. Y'all, my whole family called me and told me no. They were very concerned about Portland. They know that the white folks in Portland, when it comes to law enforcement, do not play. And they didn't want me to be caught in the crossfire. So after 30 some odd years of hearing my family say, well, you go to the front line. You're there. You're in front of everything. You make sure you're connected to the community. You know who's present. They said, don't do that. And it was the first time I heard that from them. And I'm not going to lie, I had a week's worth of a a minor psychological breakdown. What do you mean I'm not supposed to go out? What am I supposed to do? My aunt called me. My 91-year-old grandmother called me. My sister called me. She had her 8-year-old niece talk to me. And I was just like, this is a lot, dog. Like, family members I hadn't talked to in forever were trying to convince me to hang back. It's too dangerous. So as I dealt with all of those things, I had to figure out, well, first of all, no, y'all, I'm going down there. I'm going to figure something out. But I'm going to do it in a way that's not going to that'll make sure y'all don't yell at me. Because that's what I needed, right? How do I remain an accomplice in the system, even when my family is telling me to do something other than what I'm feeling driven to do? And so I picked up a drum. I found a bunch of folks who were interested in just being there for the movement. And with a drum, helping with chanting, helping with just being visible, just being a part of the movement, I found a way to be there without being a threat to the existing system. I found a way to challenge without being a threat, because I'm not gonna lie, I prefer to be a threat to the system. It's better when you can walk into a room and people feel like, well, I have to figure out how to engage with this person because there are consequences if I don't. And there's power in that. And part of the struggle that we have is when we get into these spaces and we get to these tables, people aren't giving us that power. They're trying to appease us. Or if not us, they're trying to appease a court of public opinion because they don't want to get dragged. And not my responsibility. My responsibility is to change the material conditions for the people here, for the people you are directly connected to today. So we know that things aren't complete. There are still a lot of gaps, and we have a tendency to look at the positive, right? We do look at the past, we look at the past, well, let's think about the baby steps that we got. And so it becomes difficult for us to hold a variety of things at the same time. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the things that didn't work. And we've got some wins, right? We've had some court stuff happen, we've seen some changes, but we've also seen places like Texas continue to pressure our community in ways that are extremely destructive. And while we are really starting to learn, Portland, West Coast, easier, let's not be Portland-centric here, but West Coast as a whole does better with some of these things than maybe other parts of the country. But even here, we're still lagging, because while we might understand some queerness, I moved here knowing that my race was going to be an issue. Portland is one of the whitest cities in America with a population of over 500,000 people. And I knew that. I knew that very explicitly. And so when it comes to hearing about, well, we've got queer rights, that's cool. We're now using a race-first lens as a state. Awesome. But how am I supposed to feel when we have some of these wins in court, but Emmett Till's murderers got to live their whole lives and die in their beds? Emmett Till's accuser is 88 years old. She's alive. Emmett Till would be alive. How am I supposed to hold that part of my identity and my queerness in this moment when I'm supposed to be celebrating all of these different wins for all of these queer people, right? You technically can't get fired for being queer at a job. Do y'all know how many states are at-will states? Right to work, came from one, still live in one. Doesn't matter what their reason is, they can still fire me. And so when we think about reconnection, we have to think about what brought us here in the first place. Is it reactionary? Like, are you being a reactionary? Is it because you heard about something in Texas or you heard about something in Ukraine? And that isn't necessarily the folks in the room. It's for everybody. You know, where do you come into this space? And by the way, please keep the explicit racism happening around the Ukraine situation. If you haven't seen it yet, go look. There are journalists, there are world leaders saying these white Christians are going to fit better here than any kind of person with melanin. And so, if I can find space to be queer, that's super cool, but where am I supposed to find space to be Black? Where are disabled queers supposed to find space that's accessible? Where are people with different body sizes supposed to find accessible health care when everyone judges them for their size alone? And so this idea that we can continue to play whack-a-mole with liberation or freedom really has to fade. And it's going to be us who are responsible for it because we hold so many different pieces of identity together. We have to push the spaces around us to move past this singular race-first lens because, well, then what about gender? What about disability? What about age? What about immigration or migrant status? Those things are extremely important. Is it a part of your identity that motivates you? And so you need to know which parts of your identity brings you here, so you can identify the gaps that you have. Which things aren't a part of your identity? Who else do you see in this space? So again, how am I supposed to hold all of this? As I reconnect with the work around me, how am I supposed to reconnect with people who only partially accept me? Or will only accept certain things in terms of liberation or freedom? Because we are all different people. So which part do I address first? Which parts do I think people see first? I don't know. Sometimes I know that it's what they hear first from me. In the last 24 hours, despite makeup, despite skirt, hard femme, hello, I've been misgendered twice in this town. And I don't affect my voice. So what am I doing in that space in order to be seen, to be held as relevant, while still being visible? So which parts of myself do I ask to wait in line? I want you to ask yourself that. Which parts of yourself do you want to wait in line? Because I'm going to go harder on baby steps in a little while, y'all. And I promise I'm not going to talk for the whole half hour, at least I don't think so. But, you know, how has past behavior in relation to parts of my identity affected my lived experience and my material conditions in the world? You're going to hear me say that term a lot because that's what we have to change. We have a tendency to really focus on ideological differences, and as long as we raise awareness, people will naturally choose the right thing. I see this a lot as a member of the DEI industrial complex. It doesn't happen that way. Training alone and presentation of a moral positive does not drive people to it necessarily. So, not to drag Bro. But Bro has, for example, had some challenges in the past, right? Being seen as a little bit of a relic, was created for gay marriage, what do you do now? With little attention paid to some of the laws that they've helped pass and some of the people in community that they've really been able to benefit. But they're open to talking about it. It's a start. When we reconnect, are we holding what people have done in the past? Are we keeping that punitive, carceral mindset that once someone has done something, it's there forever? Where's the line? They're open to talking about their support for sex workers. They're open to talking about having spent months in a cohort trying to address some of the issues related to race and identity within their space. Is that worthy of conversation? How do you reconnect with things like that? Who in your life are you not reconnecting with because of those behaviors or things like that in the past? Reconnecting is about relationship building around ourselves, our identities, our work, where we fit, and then reapproaching that over and over and over again as we continue to assess and reassess where we are. Huey Newton said in 1970 that we must gain security in ourselves and therefore have respect and feelings for all oppressed people. So again, why are you here? Where's your place in the work? What's your current approach? How are you bringing yourself, and not just I am an ally. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute too. I am a feminist. I'm a disability justice activist. Okay, that's great. Are those things about yourself that you know, or are those things that are you out here trying to save people? Saviors aren't going to work. I assume most of the folks in this room know that. But nobody wants to be saved. People want to save themselves. And so when we think about these tables and how we get ourselves and other people to these tables, we have to think about not only the table, we have to think about who made the table and why they made that table. What was the purpose? It's very easy for us to say, well, the systems in this country weren't built for certain marginalized or oppressed people. That's cool. Who built them? Was it actually white men in power? Or was it white women in power? Was it cis people? Was it able-bodied people? Who built which tables and why? And so we often see in a lot of different spaces the idea that we have an open door, right? Oh man, we won't take anybody. We really want to support everyone. They just have to come to us first. An open door is not an invitation, and we all know that. So what work are we doing on the inside of our organizations and inside of ourselves to create inclusive spaces for other people and being very transparent about who we are? Ask yourself which government agency you're waiting on to administrate ourselves into freedom and liberation. Please do that often. It's just really challenging. Which major for-profit company is going to build a mutual aid network to provide protection or food for you on your table? Which one is going to take your add $2 on to your purchase today so that we can donate to someone else and take the tax write-off. You're better off taking that money and just going outside and handing it to the human being standing outside that store holding the sign. Again, we function with this administrative idea that we can legislate our ways ourselves to freedom. And that's not the only answer. There are so many other levels that we need to be functioning on, and we need to be looking at how to make happen. A lot of our relationships are broken. We fear each other, we're tired. COVID really changed the game. I heard from folks I hadn't heard from in like 10 years, and I didn't hear from folks that I had spoken to on a regular basis. And so how do we rebuild relationships as we reconnect with folks? As we reconnect, we need to hold that identity piece, right? I want to talk about something I saw just the other day. I watched an entire room full of people reassure a white guy that he did indeed have a place at the table. That was hard for me to watch. And, I mean, like, it was a room full of black and brown folks, and they had to reassure this dude that, well, you have a place there. This is what white allies can do. This is your purpose. And it was pretty generic stuff. It wasn't just, I mean, someone did go into some specifics, but it was pretty generic stuff. Y'all, I'm tired of doing that. Think about the times you've seen that happen. How many marginalized people or oppressed people have you seen get that treatment? That a room full of people stop what they're doing, shift their conversation, shift their language to make one or two people who are oppressed or marginalized feel valuable at that table, understand what their purpose is aside from being a checkmark or a token. But that relationship had to be built, right? Regardless of how we feel about that situation in the moment, we had to build a relationship so people did assure and reassure him. And that was important because that's safety. People only change when they feel safe, when they feel resourced, when they feel included. And so we have to do the work as folks kind of on the other side of that. People who hold these identities, the anger and the frustration, the years worth of disrespect and being overlooked. We too have to look inside ourselves and find the places of discomfort where we can rebuild some relationships with folks who have power. So I want everyone to take a second to kind of think about what authentic relationships have you previously built? What amount of work did it take if you didn't click right away, if you really had to put in the effort? What fears keep you from engaging with others to the same degree? From saying the wrong, are you afraid of saying the wrong thing, being misinterpreted? It's interesting because marginalized people and oppressed people feel that way all the time. And still have to plod on, building relationships with people who very well might be extremely dedicated to sticking their heads in the sand or pushing back against us. We have to figure out how to heal those mistakes, how to address conflict openly, and how to heal, because we're not going to move forward without it. So before I end this portion of this section, I just want to say, before you build, please take off your labels. Please. Like, I'm a white knuckle up here and try not to grab this thing too hard. Our labels aren't useful anymore, y'all. They can give an idea of some of your life experiences, but your conditions, your material conditions might be different. Two queer people do not have the same life experience. And once you start bringing other demographic markers into it, it's going to start to change even more radically. Whether you refer to yourself as an activist, feminist, liberal, social justice advocate, you can think of those things like stickers broadly emblazoned across your shirt. Like all of these wonderful little name tags. And they're not worth the paper they're printed on if your behavior doesn't match in this moment. And you need to be honest with yourself that your behavior isn't always going to match in every moment. Because we're human and it can't. And so then you now have to reconcile, well, I thought I was X, and I'm not doing X thing, so am I Y? And now we end up with imposter syndrome. Now we start to second guess ourselves. Now we take ourselves out of the fight when we really needed to be there the whole time and have faith and confidence in ourselves from the beginning. Refresh, another good word, another good buzzword. Recharge, replenish, reinvigorate, revivify. I love that word. Re-up, for those of you who catch that one, refill. They're all synonyms for try harder, right? It's really what it's about. Try harder, try differently. Audre Lorde said that without community, there's no liberation. But community must not mean the shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that those differences do not exist. advocating the mere tolerance of difference between people is the grossest reformism. It's total denial of the creative function of difference in our lives. Difference must not merely be tolerated, but seen as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark like a dialectic. Those of us who stand outside the circle of the society's definitions of acceptable, those of us who've been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, or gay, lesbian, or queer, who are black, or older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It's learning how to take our differences and make them strengths, for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, they will never engage us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those who still define the master's house as their only or sole source of support. She mentioned that Simone de Beauvoir said, "It's in the knowledge of genuine conditions of our lives we must draw strength to live and our reasons for acting." I get stressed out in the Black community when I hear people throw that quote out about the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Because even in my own community, they don't know that it was a lesbian talking about women. She was at a conference talking about representation and the lack thereof. There's no intersectionality there. We're taking these snippets and we're taking these pieces and we're trying to pack them on top of one another, and it's not working very well. So when we think about refresh, what invigorates you? What differences are important to you? What information do you not have? Not just what you need or what you think will be interesting. When you look at your identities, which pieces are different from other people whose lived experiences are not just radically different, but even slightly different? How can you acknowledge that your experiences, even as someone who might share the same primary demographic markers, fundamentally and vastly different from the human being sitting next to, across from you, or around you? So when you think about what invigorates you, it is kind of a catch-22, because if seeing bad things happen is what inspires you, you're stuck in our system, because that's reactionary. Where penal codes and harm define whether or not we get to push back, whether or not we respond is defined by who's hurt in the first place, as opposed to what needs to be done. And being reactionary isn't bad. It happens. We respond. We're human. But it isn't a pathway to liberation or justice. A liberatory mindset is necessary. For those of you who don't know what a liberatory mindset is, it's that moment when you choose to go differently. It isn't just awareness into action, because that's the thing that happens a lot, right? Especially when we react to things. Liberatory justice mindsets start with awareness, and then you move to justice and context. You need to understand why you're doing these things. It's great that you want to house trans people, that's super cool, but do you understand the challenges that they're facing systemically, structurally, socially? Because if you don't, you're not useful in that fight. You're just not. You're just not. Before we move forward, we have past justice. We have to figure out what accountability structures are in place first. We have this tendency to want to jump into something and then say, I'm going to continue to do it, I'm going to make sure I come back to it, and I'm going to make sure I'm accountable. If you haven't done the work of accountability first, you're not going to long term, because it's harder. You haven't created the structures that you need, so if you're tired or stressed, or if it scares you, or if it's hard, you're more likely to not figure out how you can continue to go back, or what systems are in place to make sure you continue to try. So, as you recharge, go beyond what brought you here in the first place. Because odds are, something that brought you here is your personal stakes being affected, or you having personal stakes because of something you're affected by in the first place. And we need to not just tolerate discomfort, but embrace that which makes us uncomfortable, because that's the direction we have to go. So when we're least comfortable, we learn the most about ourselves. And that's hard for folks. We talk a lot about folks how to be uncomfortable, right? Well, our community is usually focusing on cis people, on straight people. Well, what parts of yourself are making you uncomfortable? Like, what parts of yourself do you not want to deal with? There's variations on identity exercises, but one of the questions I really like to ask is, which parts of yourself do you want to learn more about? Which parts of yourself do you feel cut off from, either intentionally or unintentionally? Because those are going to be a really great opportunity, a rich garden for you to pull all kinds of new feelings, new passion, new energy from. So an example of recharge is how the DEI industrial complex, and I do refer to it that way because that's what it is, is changing. People are moving away from talking about personal racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. We're talking about structural changes, and this is actually reinvigorating the conversation, because this moment when people hear, well, you're calling me racist and I need to step back, they're not going to do that the same way. If I'm not talking about you being transphobic and not wanting to house people. I'm talking to you about how the system has made it easy for you to be transphobic when it comes to housing trans people and not being held accountable or responsible for it when it happens. So how did I personally recharge? Because everyone wants personal stories, right? You want to consume those, they're great. I use a whiteboard. I used to use Post-it notes, but working in healthcare, I had a really helpful boss who walked by and saw all my Post-it notes and was like, that looks like it could have personal health information on it for patients. Stop. So, all right, guess I'll find something else to use. I switched to a whiteboard. And I put 3 words on it specifically: age, disability, and body size. And every single time I erased that board, I kept those 3 words or I rewrote them, because I don't have those lenses naturally. I'm an able-bodied human. My body is not very large. And so my experience with healthcare, social communities, everything is vastly different than people who don't have that. And age. I'm getting older. It happens. I was recently reminded that if Back to the Future happened today, they'll be going back to like 92, 93. It's weird. It made me feel super old. But it happens. And that was something I needed to make sure I was continuing to pay attention to. I got involved in older advocacy. They have something called Project Visibility, which is specifically about working with queer seniors, talking about their lives, their needs, and what's happening there. I made a decision not to save, but to become informed, to develop context, and to move forward from there. So in this last bit here, we've got redefine our work, and it is the biggest one. This is the biggest section. It starts, we've got reframing, revising, reissuing, redirecting, recalibrating. I want to take it back to Malcolm X. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, there's no progress. Progress is healing the wound the blow made, and they haven't even begun to pull the knife out, much less heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there. What sucks is that happened, that was 1964. Like 58 years later? Still true. There are still people who are not trying to get on board with making significant, radical change to the material conditions of people's lives, the actual lived experiences that they have. So as we take about a minute to think about tables and material conditions, what are you doing to change the material conditions of the lives of the people around you? Not in a conceptual sense, not in I work for this org, we do great work for the community, but you personally. You give money to the ACLU, that's cool. You give money, you walk by, money to people who walk by you on the street. Because, to be honest with you, it's going to matter a little bit more. Those are the people in your neighborhood. Those are the people who you get a chance to rebuild or build a relationship with who you don't already know. I was listening to an Indigenous person on TikTok who really went in on these tables, man. It was great. Because the purpose of the table is what's going to define whether or not we even need that table. If a table was built to house people, but it was built by, for, and around white folks, it's great that I know that, but if that's what the table was built for, what benefit is there to adding me to that table on its own? I now have to push against systemic inertia. I now have to get stagnancy. I have to figure out how to get people to listen to me. I have to get people out of this mindset. Well, we've done it this way for so long and it's been fine. It's not helpful anymore. And so we have to find a way to tear that table apart. The next time someone asks you, we have a table, or we want to invite you to the table, tell them no. You don't want to go to a table. We can sit in a circle. You can get down on the floor, sit lotus, you can sit in some chairs, but let's not put a table in front of us, between us, because we don't need the table, and the table that was built may not have been built the right height for somebody. If you're using a chair and the table is too high, that table was not for you. But you've been asked to go to that table, right? That's a benefit. It's better than nothing. I really want my community to stop saying it's better than nothing. I really want my community to stop saying baby steps are okay. I really want my community to stop saying, well, we've come this far, and I remember how things used to be. Great, go talk to a young person. Get some of their anger about how things are now. And that is something I'm learning as I get older. I do remember how hard things used to be. I remember 10 years ago trying to get access to trans healthcare, to gender-affirming care. It was different. And it is great that we have access to it now. But when I talk to young people, and they talk to me about the gaps that they still see, and they get fired up, it does reinvigorate me. It reminds me that I am in certain places where I can bring them with me. I can move from taking information as part of community feedback, as part of a focus group. I can just take that information with me, and I can take those people with me instead. Your table isn't big enough for everybody because I have 4 people from community who are coming with me. And if you don't want them at this table, I'm not going to be at your table either. Hold the line. It is not your responsibility to fix every floundering nonprofit, every racist space, every sexist or homophobic space. Your energy is too precious, fam. There are other places where you are necessary, and there are other places where we need you that aren't just going to swallow up your energy on a free EID committee or DEI committee that's outside of your job scope at your day job. Waiting for government administrations to fix this is like a trickle-down change. That's a losing battle, y'all. If we continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, well, we saw what just happened in our previous administration. And that is us continuing to try and vote for the lesser of two evils. I struggle sometimes in community because a lot of folks on the left just don't give a crap about voting at all anymore. And that is the part that I struggle with. That's fine. People don't vote. The part that I struggle with is those that do, overhyping the benefits and the purpose of voting. I'm not saying don't vote. Some of us see it as perfunctory. We have to do it. These are motions that we go through. Malcolm X also said that by any means necessary, right? Well, for me, that means that includes by every means available. I'm going to push from every side. But at the end of the day, if you spend 90% of your time waiting for an election and 10% of your time voting, you've wasted 90% of your time when you could have been out building relationships, reconnecting, identifying the challenges, the lived experiences of the people around you, and finding ways to functionally change them for the better. We have to remember that things like civil rights law didn't pass because of a vote. Yes, technically because of folks who were voted in, but that was force. They threatened to march on Washington. That's why that changed. That's how black folks got their own unions as well. But it was 57 years ago that all black folks got their right to vote in all 50 states. So when you tell me voting is the way we fix this, I have a 91-year-old grandmother who's going to laugh in your face because she wasn't able to vote until she was a grown adult. She was in her 30s before she could vote. So assume democracy is limited because it was intended to be. Again, I'm not saying don't vote. This is a legislative organization. Grow is a legislative policy-pushing organization. There's benefit to doing that work, and some people need to do it. But not everyone has to do all of that, and it is not going to save us if you rely on other people to make the changes that we need to see with the people around you. I'm not saying you have to boil the ocean. You just have to start throwing starfish back. And you've got to figure out a way to find the starfish that you've never even thought about and get them back into the ocean too. Conditional support also stresses me out. And so this is something I want to talk about because our community sometimes struggles with folks who say things like, I'm totally in support of trans people, but this thing about sports. Or I'm totally cool with trans people, but this thing about minors accessing like puberty blockers. So I need those folks, and I need you to encourage those folks to be louder, be clear about where they are. And as we say in the Black community, say that shit with your whole chest. Say it with your whole chest, because that's the only way people will figure out where in the work you actually exist. I'm not saying you can't have lines or limits, everyone does. But the people who are fighting for youth access they can ignore you. They can literally ignore you. You don't need to be at their table. They don't have to make space for you at the table. They don't have to make space for your opinion, for your opinion, if you're that person. They don't have to. It's not required, because you aren't benefiting the work in that moment. And it's okay. There are other opportunities, other spaces where you can get into the work. Go there so that you can feel like you are actually being resourced. You are actually being included. I also encourage folks to stop sanitizing their language and focus on reframing. I've got a friend of mine who made the specific choice to stop code switching entirely. People change the way they engage with him because of that. It's a reminder that this Ukraine thing and the explicit racism happening around it, we see that explicit racism exists on the world stage. Why are we so convinced it wouldn't happen here? A lot of the people that I know who said that they would be totally fine with AAVE end up in a space where they start to have trouble maybe understanding someone. And so they give up. Or I'll say something like, I'm here for every black person from Harvard to the hood to the deepest southern hollow. And, well, I don't know about all that. Well, say that with your whole chest. So that I know that I can move somewhere else for this part of the conversation, this part of the work. When we choose to sanitize our language, we are intentionally narrowing the aperture of the camera that is looking at the world around us and the problems that we are facing. That isn't to say we should only focus on the negative. We have to develop the ability to hold multiple things in tandem, or else we will continue to play whack-a-mole. We'll have a race-first lens, then we'll have a gender-first lens, and then we'll have an age-first lens, and then we'll have a disability-first lens. Which parts of your identity are you going to put in line behind the others? And when you do, how can you justify asking other people to wait, to continue to endure oppression, straight up brutalization, so that your comfort can be centered first and foremost? We don't have to function that way. We don't have to believe that the system can only handle one or two things at a time. If we function differently, if we demand differently, if we move differently, if we move together. Huey Newton said that we have to remember we have not established a revolutionary value system and that we are only in the process of establishing it. He said this when he was talking to a predominantly black audience about how the queer rights movement and the women's rights movements should be aligned with the Black liberation movement. He could see back then that it was challenging, and he talked about how certain parts of the black community feel deeply emasculated, they feel disempowered. So, how dare somebody like me, who has even less power in this system, associate with a certain type of feminist or a certain type of activist? I'm making things harder for them. I'm making things more difficult for them. Don't care. I just don't care. Because we're either all going to get there, or we're going to have to wait in line, and people will continue to get more and more frustrated until something changes, because we only tolerate reform until the system can tolerate a revolution, until it can tolerate a fundamental change. So when it comes to incrementalism, baby steps versus radical change, we have to be careful, because this country's incrementalist approach has happened on the backs of a lot of dead black and brown people, a lot of dead disabled people, a lot of dead fat folks, and that's what we're being asked to do. Wait longer, because we can only do one thing at a time, because we cannot get enough on the same page to create a different type of unified movement and response. If electing revolution, you can't completely disregard cultural paradigms of the population at large, or you engender counter-revolution and resistance. So what then must be repurposed or retained in order to sustain that revolutionary paradigm? One approach says you can confront those gaps in the system, see the need for change, and then synthesize those into something more while retaining the original essence of the thing. That's reform. Baby steps is asking marginalized people to continue to be discriminated against, brutalized, until the dominant cultural identities feel they've hurt them enough to change the situation. Asking marginalized people to continue to be hurt until enough folks think it's gotten bad enough or gone on long enough that, okay, we'll make it stop now. Can you imagine what that sounds like for marginalized people? I have no choice but to brutalize you until you and your community appease me appropriately, or for long enough that I feel like I will finally do something about it. That reframing is important. As we redefine our work, try to reframe the things that people around you are saying. In the healthcare world, they used to use this term, established need. Nobody liked it when I said, patients suffer until we think we want to do something about it, until we figure out a solution. It was an immediate response. It was almost knee-jerk by the end. Nobody wanted to hear that. But that's the truth. Find ways to rustle jimmies. It's necessary. Find a way to stop sanitizing your language and reframe what's happening around you for a greater good. And if ultimate fairness is our goal, would it be inappropriate to ask those with privilege to bear the fear of feeling like what they know, who they are, and what they know of as society will be lost? I mean, granted, only for literally as long as it takes for us to walk over to the new table and build something with other folks, but, I mean, is that unfair? Black and brown folks, marginalized people, immigrants have had to live every day with the idea that their entire identity could be erased. Why? Because this country has done it before. They've done it successfully, multiple times. It's strange to hear dominant cultural identities say that they're not willing to give up a shred of comfort. They're not willing to sit in this, in a lack of being sure of what the next step or the next couple of weeks or months will look like when the rest of us have had to do it the whole time. We're doing it literally right now, today, in this moment. I don't know which future administration is going to steal our health care. You? Well, we know it's real, right? Fascist greed is real. We are living through a period of global fascism, y'all. And what do we do about it? We help a country that got bombed, super cool. But there's a complexion issue involved. So what do we do about the other countries that are still struggling? Talk about nonviolent revolution, and it's interesting because this country was not established through nonviolent revolution at all. Now it's seen as the only acceptable option. The conversation has been successfully reframed, so much so that when people show up in the streets and say, if you don't change things, we're going to break windows and set trash cans on fire. And the response to that is human beings showing up with guns saying, if you continue to try and make change, we will literally take your life. So, civil rights movement, that was nonviolent, right? We know it wasn't nonviolent, right? We know. If you don't know that, go look at some of the comics that they put in the newspapers about Martin Luther King, talking about nonviolent revolutions. He was voted one of the most hated men in America in 1968. But every MLK Day, I see a lot of out of context quotes saying we should judge people by their skin, or not by their skin, but by their merit. Raise your hand if you think the United States is a meritocracy. Right? So, seeing these things continue to happen is really, really challenging, because where does change come from? Not everybody out here is trying to be a martyr, y'all. Not everyone out here is ready to sit there and be abused. Not everyone is out here ready to have a hostile group of human beings literally shoot at them. I was pepper sprayed at point-blank range by Alan Swain. Those of you who don't know, he is a virulent racist, and on that same day pulled a gun and pointed it at a lot of us. I was unsure if I was going to die that day. And 2 years later, we're still arguing for change in our penal system, change in our cultural system, and it hasn't happened. The freedom marches were intended to be nonviolent. But again, who brought the violence to those situations and then said, you can't defend yourself? There's a book that I encourage everybody here to read. It's called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. It isn't to say that people need to become violent. Violence isn't necessarily the answer. But understand that Martin Luther King Jr. walked around with a gun on his hip. He did that by the end. And it didn't even that didn't help. He was still killed. Malcolm X advocated self-defense. We lost him too. Angela Davis actually has a really great commentary around the idea of violence when it comes to political change and who gets to control that narrative. When someone like me could still wake up with a cross burning in my front yard. We've idolized struggle so deeply, this concept of resilience. that we would rather marginalized people endure that so that we can say, look what we've overcome. Happens a lot with, to be blunt, white kids who go through a racist period on Facebook or something along those lines. Well, you've changed. Look at how far you've gone. What about the people who were hurt along the way? Why do we have to earn our freedom through nonviolence when everyone else got to earn it in a different way? Again, I'm not advocating for violence in any way, shape, or form. What I'm doing is I'm trying to encourage you to hold these contradictions in your mind at the same time and process them to understand that different people approach this fight in very different ways. That has an effect long term. The reason the effect, or the example of that is when Oregon was incorporated as a state, they gave 350 acres to every white male who managed to make it out here. Black folks and Chinese folks were explicitly excluded. Black folks eventually had the lash law. Every 6 months you're here, we're going to take you out back and whoop your ass. Who's supposed to, what kind of generational wealth can be built there? What kind of faith in any systems, in any administrative systems, could be found there when that is the history of this state, not even just the country, just the state? Why do folks have to engage in using the system when other folks have gone around, behind, under, through, so consistently and gotten what they've needed as a result? So, bide your time. Figure out when it's going to be appropriate for you to move on something. Until then, challenge your material conditions. If all you want to do, or all someone that you're talking to wants to do is vote because they're too tired, talk to them about what makes you tired. Talk to them about the work that you're doing, not to make them feel bad, but to give them an understanding that some of us don't get to be tired. I get very, very frustrated when my white friends say, I'm overwhelmed, and so I've stopped looking at the news. I've stopped worrying about politics. I'm just not thinking about it for a while because it's too hard. When I know all it takes is one wrong political move, and my health care has now been stolen again. One of the reasons I moved to this state is because I was actually being told I needed to cut my hair to keep a job. Legislatively, we have a law now that says we can't make people cut their hair. That was helpful. That was useful. But you know what that law didn't do? Actually put food on my table. It didn't connect me to any mutual aid groups that are talking to folks who had to cut their hair and deal with the trauma. Folks who cut their hair to keep a job, or folks who chose not to do that, lost a job. An administrative decision didn't change the material conditions for most people. Voting's another thing I just want to continue to harp on, because suffrage sucked, Bill. I know I've hurt some feelings with that. Let me be blunt. I don't care. I don't. Suffrage was not for everybody. Suffrage was a process of identifying which people go in line to get which benefits when. A lot of suffragettes were racist. Now, we can have that tendency, well, they did such good things. There was some positive stuff that came out of it, like ACT UP. ACT UP did a lot of great work around HIV. They were also dealing with racism. We can hold both of those things because we have to be able to critically analyze them. And the moment you close yourself off to feeling uncomfortable by having to deal with the material conditions of a situation, you are choosing to ignore reality. People getting the right to vote is great. It was necessary. How do Black women deal with the fact that they were never even included in the conversation? What are you supposed to say to a Black woman who says, I don't care about voting? It didn't change anything for me. It hasn't really changed anything for me. 53% of white women can completely invalidate over 90% of Black women's votes. What faith are they supposed to have in that system? So, in summation, we have to be able to sit with the good, the bad, and the ugly. When we think about reconnecting, we have to think about which pieces of our identity brought us to the fight and which ones we aren't even thinking about. Because there's parts of ourselves we may not have considered bringing. And I'm not saying all or nothing approaches are the only way to go. You know, part of material reality is that we do have to deal with incremental change, baby steps, accelerationism. But you can redefine how you respond. Next time somebody says you screwed up, you know what, I hear you. And that totally makes sense. Keep it within context. Remember first and foremost that there are multiple perspectives at the table. Everyone can be a little bit right, everyone can be a little bit wrong, everyone can be a little bit traumatized, and everyone can be a little validated in that as we try and work through and around it. Please redefine your pace. We get tired, but we allow a sense of urgency to drive us endlessly towards program expansion, revamping, solutions that are the easiest, the fastest, the cheapest, the most PR friendly, and the least uncomfortable. We get overwhelmed by the amount of things going on and tired of the news cycle. We doom scroll. Somebody I live with has news on in her bedroom, in the workshop, and on her phone when she walks around the property. Holy crap. Talking heads aren't going to help you. Because a talking head's job is to get you a vote, which is good, but we're not going to wait for administrative changes to save us, right? We're not going to do that. So in summation, think about your reality. Think about the material conditions of the people around you. Change those. Don't do it ideologically. Don't do it conceptually. Do something different, because I'm assuming that because all these folks came here, you're probably doing something in community. You're probably doing something somewhere, working for work, directly engaging with people. Find someone new. Find someone totally new. Find someone totally outside of your realm of understanding, your scope, your knowledge, your ability. Just sit down and talk with them. Don't extract. I'm here to get you to do this thing or teach me. Just talk to them. Get to know their life, their situation, and share yours. Become confident in your identity, where your privilege lies and where it doesn't, so that you can have that same conversation with someone else confidently, safely, and find a way to move forward together. Thank you.